USS Gregory, DD-802, was patrolling radar picket duty in company with three landing craft ship on the afternoon of 8 April when at 18:30, four Japanese Ki-51 Sonya planes dove from out of the sun, a favorite tactic of the Kamikaze. One of the planes, although hit many times, still managed to crash into Gregory on the portside amidships just above the waterline, punching through the hull to flood her fire rooms and forward engine room. Fortunately, only 2 men were wounded by this attack, and there were no fatalities. The ship was able to make it back to Kuramaretto for repairs and continued serving a long career in the Navy. USS Little, DD-803, was patrolling at picket duty No. 10 on 3 May 1945 in company 5 other ships when at 18:13 hours, incoming enemy aircraft were picked up on radar. As many as 24 kamikazes descended through the low clouds to attack the American ships below. Just a few minutes after USS Aaron Ward, DM-34, was struck by a suicide plane, at 18:43 Little would take a kamikaze hit on her portside that broke her keel and started a huge fire. Within just a couple minutes, a second plane would crash into the ship's midsection, followed quickly by 2 more simultaneously striking the bow and fantail. These impacts on the Little demolished her topside superstructure, and she began listing heavily to port when her captain gave the order to abandon ship. The destroyer would break in half and sink under the waves by 1855. Her crew lost 30 men dead and another 72 wounded. Allen M. Sumner class. USS Allen M. Sumner, DD-692, was making a nighttime sweep with 2 other destroyers targeting Japanese transports unloading supplies in Ormac Bay just after midnight on 3 December 1944. Although the American ships managed to sink the transports, the Japanese responded ferociously with planes, destroyers, and shore batteries. In the fierce fighting, USS Cooper was hit by a torpedo and sank. Sumner was damaged by a near-missed bomb which threw fragments across the deck, wounding 13 men. She was also hit by a shore battery which caused negligible damage. On 2 January 1945, Sumner was supporting a minesweeping group in Lingian Gulf when at 11:58 several kamikazes swooped in out of the sun and lined up to hit the destroyer. The first 2 planes were shot down, but a third plane crashed into the afterstack before skidding across the deck into the water, its bomb detonating on the main deck near the No. 2 torpedo launcher. A second kamikaze hit the port side of the bridge. Although damage did not threaten the integrity of the hull, extensive damage required her to retire from the Gulf. The Allen M. Sumner lost 14 men killed and 19 wounded. USS Mole, DD-693, was making a nighttime sweep with 2 other destroyers targeting Japanese transports unloading supplies in Ormac Bay just after midnight on 3 December 1944. After sinking the Japanese transports, the American destroyers were counterattacked by the defending Japanese forces. Mole would take several hits from shore batteries which killed 3 and wounded 25 men, but damage was not serious. While assisting a damaged LSD, which had been hit by a kamikaze on 15 December 1944, off Mindoro when the landing ship suffered from a large magazine explosion. Fragments of debris and shrapnel would strike the Mole, killing 1 sailor and wounding another 10 men. Damage to the destroyer was patched up and she would remain on station. USS Ingraham, DD-694, was serving on the radar picket line off Okinawa on 4 May 1945 when her group of ships were targeted by a large swarm of kamikazes. At 08:22 Ingraham became the prime focus of the Japanese suicide planes after 2 other American ships had been sunk. The destroyer fiercely defended herself, knocking down at least 7 planes within a few short minutes before an A-6M-0 managed to strike the ship at the waterline on her port side. The plane's bomb punched through to explode in the ship's forward diesel room, causing severe flooding and killing 14 men. Another 37 were wounded by the crash and explosion, but damage control parties were able to save Ingram. The ship was still in the United States undergoing repairs when the war ended. After a lengthy career with the U.S. Navy, Ingram was sold to Greece in 1971 and sunk as a target in 2001. USS Cooper, DD-695, was making a nighttime sweep with two sister destroyers, attempting to sink Japanese transports unloading supplies in Ormoc Bay just after midnight on 3 December 1944. The American ships were able to sink the Japanese transports, but the enemy responded with equal fury in kind. Two Japanese destroyers were able to engage the trio of American ships. During the intense gunfire at 00, 13 Cooper was struck amidships on her starboard side by a torpedo, most likely from the Japanese destroyer take. The explosion split the Cooper in half and she rapidly began sinking, slipping beneath the sea in just under a minute. Due to the intensity of the battle, her fellow destroyers could not stop to render assistance to Cooper's surviving crew in the water, many of whom had to wait hours before rescue from PBY Catalinas. 191 men were lost with Cooper. USS Hainsworth, DD-700, was steaming off Okinawa on 6 April 1945, fighting off sporadic attacks on her task group by kamikazes through the early morning hours when at 12:50, a single D-4Y Judy dive bomber broke from its formation and headed straight for the ship. Hainsworth unleashed a monsoon of defensive fire which turned the incoming kamikaze back, but the suicide attacker made another sharp bank for the ship. The plane smashed into the ship's main radio transmitter room, spreading a large fire over the ship's superstructure. Fortunately, the plane had lost its bomb as it violently maneuvered to hit the ship, certainly sparing the ship more damage. Fires were put out an hour later, and Hainsworth made her way back to Karamaretto for repairs. After decades serving the U.S. Navy, the destroyer was sold to Taiwan in 1970 and sunk as an artificial reef in 2001. USS Hank, DD-702, was patrolling as radar picket off Okinawa the afternoon of 11 April 1945, when the ship's crew sighted an incoming A6M-0 coming in low off the port bow heading for the bridge. Hank put up a furious barrage of defensive fire which caused the kamikaze pilot to miss his target, splashing the sea just a few yards away and exploding. The kamikaze hit close enough in the water to hurl debris and shrapnel over the exposed areas of the Hank, killing 3 men and wounding 10 more. Damage, however, was slight and repaired. On 9 August 1945, Hank and Bori would find themselves in the midst of 5 circling kamikazes stalking the 2 destroyers from above. After hitting Bori, the remaining planes turned their attention to Hank. The first kamikaze, an A6M, came in from straight ahead but missed the ship due to a last-second maneuver, showering the destroyer with debris. A second kamikaze came screaming in, but its wing was shot off, sending the plane tumbling into the ocean, dousing the Hank with burning gasoline in the process. The ship lost 1 man and 5 wounded in one of the final kamikaze attacks of the war. Post-war, Hank served in Korea and was sold to the Argentinian Navy in 1972. USS Bori, DD-704, was acting as picket duty for returning carrier planes with USS Hank, DD-702, on 9 August 1945, when at 14:50 the 2 picket destroyers came under a concentrated kamikaze attack by 5 circling planes. At 14:56, a D-3A Val broke from its group and dove down on Bori, hitting the ship between her mast and 5-inch gun director. The plane's bomb passed through the ship, exploding close enough for shrapnel to kill and injure several men. Fires were extinguished after 20 minutes, and the ship rejoined formation, but several gun mounts were destroyed. Bori would return to the main task force to transfer her wounded to a hospital ship. The ship lost 48 dead and 66 wounded. USS Barton, DD-722, was participating in the bombardment of Cherbourg on 25 June 1944, supporting U.S. Army troops assaulting German fortifications around the port city. when the ship was hit by a dud shell from an enemy shore battery. The dud landed in the aft diesel room, creating a hole in the side of the Barton, but no further damage. The destroyer responded with effective fire onto the German battery that hit her, who did not fire again for the rest of the bombardment. The ship had no casualties from this event. USS Walk, DD-723, was participating in the landings on Luzon, 2 January 1945, when at 11:55 while providing support in Lingayen Gulf, her crew sighted 4 enemy Ki-63 Oscars incoming at low altitude. Walk was able to shoot down the first 2 attackers. However, the third Kamikaze crashed into the bridge on the port side, engulfing the ship's superstructure in flames and knocking out the ship's main battery control directors. The ship's commanding officer, George Fleming Davis, was mortally wounded by the crash, but refused to be carried away for medical treatment until he was assured by his crew the ship would be saved. He would posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. Fires would be extinguished within 15 minutes, and Walk would remain on station until 9 January 1945. 12 of her crew members were killed by the Kamikaze attack, and another 34 were seriously wounded. USS Little, DD-724, was serving radar picket duty with 2 escorts off the northern coast of Okinawa on 16 April 1945, when at 08:27, a massive swarm of at least 50 Japanese planes approached and circled the 3 American ships. Laffey shot down 4 Kamikaze planes before the 5th suicide plane struck a glancing blow on gun mount 3 and tumbled into the sea. A 6th plane came in low at 08:45 and smashed into No. 43 and No. 4420 gun mounts, starting a gasoline fire and knocking the positions out. Moments later, 2 D-3A Vals crashed into the No. 35 gun turret, killing several men and destroying the turret. Another D-3A which made a low-gliding bomb run on the ship, which struck the stern deck and jammed the ship's rudder. 2 more Kamikazes would make successive direct hits on the ship's aft fireroom, adding to the carnage. Combat Air Patrol arrived at the right time to drive off the remaining enemy planes and saved Laffey from further damage. At least 22 Japanese planes would make direct assaults on Laffey and her escorts during the 80-minute battle. Although all 3 in the group were damaged, every ship miraculously made it back to port. Laffey had been hit by 6 Kamikazes and at least 2 bomb hits, lost 32 men killed and 71 wounded. The ship returned to the States under her own power and served in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Today she is a museum ship in Charleston, South Carolina. USS O'Brien, DD-725, was supporting minesweepers well inshore of the battleship Texas, which was engaging German shore batteries at Cape Levi, near Cherbourg on 25 June 1944. O'Brien's own gunfire was so accurate that enemy gunnery positions shifted from Texas to O'Brien. She received a direct hit just abaft the bridge, but was able to stay on station long enough to lay a smoke screen for Texas. 13 men were killed and 19 wounded in this action. On 6 January 1945, while escorting a minesweeper group off Lingayen Gulf, O'Brien was targeted by 2 Kamikazes at 14:27. One missed the ship and the other crashed into the port side of her fantail, knocking off a large piece, but luckily nobody was hurt. On 27 March 1945, while cruising near Karamaretto, O'Brien was attacked by 2 Kamikazes that had been following a group of passing American planes. The first plane was blasted by gunfire and landed in the sea less than 75 yards away. The second plane, likely a D-3A Val, made a steep dive on O'Brien and despite heavy damage landed forward of amidships on the port side. The plane's bomb detonated a magazine, causing a large explosion. Damage control teams quickly extinguished the blaze and brought the situation back under control. 50 crewmen were killed and 76 wounded by the Kamikaze, which sent O'Brien back to the States. USS Meredith, DD-726, had been shelling Utah Beach during the Normandy invasion on 6 June 1944, when she struck a mine that killed 7 men, wounded 50 more, and severely damaged the ship. Meredith was abandoned in a calm, orderly fashion, and her hull was towed to Baie de la Seine. On 9 June 1944, a nighttime Luftwaffe air raid dropped a large, possibly guided bomb that impacted the water about 500 yards off Meredith. The shockwave from the explosion caused even more damage to the ship's hull, most certainly breaking her keel. She finally broke in half and sank 36 hours after the mine hit. Meredith lost 35 of her men killed, another 25 wounded. USS Maddox DD-731 was acting as picket for carriers off Formosa, Taiwan, on 21 January 1945, when at 13:10 a single A6M0, which had followed a group of F-6F Hellcats to avoid detection, made a steep dive towards the Maddox from above and directly astern. As the plane was about to impact the ship, the Kamikaze pulled out of his dive for his left wing to impact the ship's antenna, tumbling the plane's wreckage down onto a 40-gun mount on the port side of the superstructure. The plane's bomb detonated and set off several fires. Although the fires were extinguished, 7 men had been killed, 33 wounded, and there were serious concerns for the integrity of the ship's hull. Maddox made her way back to Ulithi for repairs, and by May was back in the fight against Japan. USS Hyman, DD-732, was patrolling 5 miles north of Lashima on 6 April 1945, when starting at 16:15 she was targeted by several kamikazes. 2 of the attackers coordinated their attacks so that one plane caught most of the anti-aircraft fire on the starboard side, while the other plane approached from the port side. Hyman's gunners managed to shoot the wing off the incoming A6M0, but the wreckage of the plane landed on the ship's forward torpedo launcher tubes between the stacks. A terrific explosion followed which created a large fire and cooked off 40 ammunition. Anti-aircraft gunners on Hyman managed to shoot down several more approaching kamikazes, possibly including a German-built FW-190, while damage control brought the fires under control. Hyman suffered 12 dead and over 40 wounded by the kamikaze strike, but luckily the ship managed to make for repairs at Saipan, then eventually back home. USS Manort El Abil, DD-733, was patrolling radar picket duty off Okinawa on 12 April 1945, when she and her 2 escorts came under sustained attack by several kamikazes. Abil was able to avoid and shoot down several enemy planes, but at 14:45, an A6M0 crashed into the ship's starboard engine room. The plane's bomb detonated, knocking out all power in the ship and possibly breaking the keel. Around the same moment, Abil was hit by the A6M. An incoming Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber released a MXY-7 Oka, the rocket-powered suicide glider bomb, carrying a 2,600 lb. warhead in its nose, ignited its rocket boosters and accelerated towards the Abil at speeds in excess of 500 miles per hour. The loss of power froze the main guns of the destroyer in place, leaving her helpless as the kamikaze missile slammed amidships. The tremendous explosion buckled the stricken Abil, breaking her in 2. The ship immediately began to sink, taking the lives of 84 men down with her. Her survivors were strafed by remaining Japanese planes until escorts were able to rescue Abil's men from the water. USS Purdy, DD-734, was patrolling some 60 miles off Okinawa on 12 April 1945 with USS Cassin Young, DD-793, when the ships and their escorts were attacked by a large formation of Japanese kamikazes. Defensive fire and combat air patrol shot down or drove away most of the enemy planes, but a few managed to break through the gauntlet of fire. At 13:37, a kamikaze came in low on the water taking heavy fire, and despite the flaming airplane impacting the water before reaching the ship, momentum carried the bomb-laden wreckage forward to crash into the starboard side. The bomb punched through the steel plating and exploded inside, causing extensive damage, killing 13 men. Another 27 crewmen were wounded during the action. Purdy left the area to make repairs and tend her wounded crew, eventually making it back to the States. USS Drexler, DD-741, was patrolling radar picket duty off Okinawa with Lowry and 4 escort ships on 28 May 1945, when at 06:45, radar picked up 6 incoming Japanese planes. Although most of the planes were shot down, a damaged twin-engine Yokosuka P-1Y managed to strike Drexler on her starboard side between the main deck and the waterline. All steam has been cut off and burning gasoline was sprayed over the main deck of the ship. As Drexler came to a dead stop, another damaged P-1Y, Francis, ominously circled the stricken destroyer 3 times before finally crashing into the ship's starboard side. The impact of Kamikaze violently rolled Drexler on her beam, causing the destroyer to quickly take on water and rapidly sink. Less than a minute after the impact of the second plane, Drexler slipped beneath the sea, taking the lives of 158 men down with her, most of them trapped below decks. A further 52 were wounded by the attack. USS Hugh W. Hadley, DD-774, was patrolling radar picket duty off Okinawa on 11 May 1945, along with the destroyer USS Evans, DD-552, and came under assault by the largest kamikaze swarm to attack a radar picket station, over 150 enemy planes. After both ships destroyed about 12 incoming bogies, Evans took several direct hits and was dead in the water at 09:00, leaving Hadley to battle on by herself. 20 minutes later, at least 10 Japanese planes simultaneously approached the destroyer from several directions. Although facing insurmountable odds, Hadley shot down all 10 attackers. Unfortunately, she could not be spared from damage, for the ship was hit by a bomb aft, a MXY-7 Oka, a kamikaze crashed on her aft deck, and a third suicide plane struck the rigging of the ship. All crew, with the exception of a 50-man damage control party, abandoned the ship into life rafts. Despite the flooding, fires, and heavy damage, Hadley was able to make it to Lashima under her own power. The crew of Hadley lost 28 men and another 67 wounded, but had shot down 23 enemy planes, including the ones who crashed into her. After being towed home to the States, it was determined the ship was too badly damaged to be returned to service. USS Zellers, DD-777, was screening the battleship USS Tennessee, BB-43, on the afternoon of 12 April off Okinawa when at 14:50, 3 Nakajima B-6N Jills were sighted approaching low on the water from the port quarter. The first 2 kamikazes were shot down, but the third struck the port side of the ship. Its 1,100 lb bomb punched through to explode adjacent to the plotting room. Zellers lost all power temporarily, but damage control was able to put all fires out. The ship would limp to Karamaretto with extensive damage and eventually back to the States. Zellers lost 29 men killed and 37 wounded by the kamikaze strike on 12 April. USS Douglas H. Fox, DD-779, was patrolling radar picket duty with 5 other ships off Okinawa on 17 May 1945, when the Americans were attacked by several kamikazes at 19:26. 4 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars began heading for Fox in a single file and were taken under fire from the ships. The first 3 were shot down, but the fourth and last in line crashed into No. 1 and No. 2 5-inch turrets, knocking out both and starting a large fire. The fire was extinguished quickly, and the ship was able to make Karamaretto for temporary repairs before arriving home on 23 June 1945. USS Storms, DD-780, was patrolling radar picket duty off Okinawa with 6 accompanying ships on 25 May 1945, when at 19:00 her crew spotted a Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo directly overhead, making a speeding dive on USS Ammon, DD-527, steaming ahead. Suddenly the Kamikaze rolled in a half-loop and plunged perfectly straight down onto the storms at Torpedo Mount. The plane's bomb detonated in the No. 3 5-inch turret's magazine, causing a devastating explosion which blew holes in the ship's hull and started a massive inferno. Damage control teams fought to extinguish the blazes and stop all flooding through the night, and by 12:00 the next day, Storms carefully made her way to Karama and eventually Buckner Bay to be placed in floating dry dock. The ship arrived home in the U.S. on 17 September 1945 for permanent repairs and would serve again in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Destroyer escort vessel DE USS Manlove D-36 was patrolling on picket duty off Okinawa on 11 April 1945 when she was attacked by a Japanese kamikaze. Despite taking tremendous damage from the ship's defensive fire, the suicide plane impacted the ship's side, wounding 9 and killing 1. Luckily, the damage to the ship did not compromise hull integrity, and she was able to return for repairs, continuing her war service until July 1945. USS Donaldson D-44 was sailing with Halsey's Third Fleet on 17 December 1944 when Typhoon Cobra overtook the area. With enormous waves and wind speeds exceeding 150 mph at times, destroyer escorts such as Donaldson struggled in the maelstrom as the ship was tossed about, sometimes rolling over 75 degrees, which caused a loss of power and damaged equipment. 3 men were lost overboard during the typhoon and were not recovered. The ship would be repaired at Ulithi and returned to service in January 1945. USS Rawl D-304 was covering a landing force and conducting anti-submarine duty off Okinawa on 12 April 1945 when her task force was attacked by 14 waves of Japanese kamikazes. At approximately 13:33, a group of 5 planes attacked the destroyer escort, coming in from multiple sides to disperse defensive fire. Although 4 attackers were shot down, a single D-3A Val flew in low only 10 feet above the water and struck the ship on her starboard side just under the deck level. The plane's bomb crashed completely through the ship to explode 15 feet off the ship's port side. Nearly simultaneously, a Ki-43 Oscar was strafing the ship and hit depth charges on the stern, which detonated, blowing several men overboard. After prompt and skillful damage control, the ship was able to extinguish all fires. 21 crew had been killed and 38 wounded. The ship was sent first to Ulithi and finally the States for repairs, finishing the war with 3 battle stars. USS Halloran D-305 was performing anti-submarine duty off Okinawa on 21 June 1945, when at approximately 22:30, a lone Japanese aircraft made a strafing run on the ship, which returned fire. The attacking plane was shot down and crashed 75 yards from the ship. However, its ordnance exploded, showering the destroyer escort with shrapnel, which killed 3 men and wounded 24 others. The damage did not endanger the Halloran, and she returned to service after a couple weeks' repairs at Kermara. USS Buckley D-51 was participating in a U-boat hunter-killer task group in the Atlantic near Cape Verde on 6 May 1944, when in the early morning hours the ship received a report of an enemy submarine less than 20 miles from her current location. Contact was established with U-66 at 3:08, which fired 2 torpedoes but both missed. After 20 minutes of exchanging gunfire and closing range, Buckley rammed the German U-boat at 3:28, locking both vessels together for a short time. Both crews exchanged small arms fire and even threw kitchen utensils and dishes at one another. After several minutes, the destroyer escort backed away from U-66, which itself then rammed the Buckley, breaking the ship's starboard propeller shaft. After this second collision, crewmen on Buckley were able to toss grenades into the conning tower of the now flaming submarine that was starting to sink. 36 German prisoners were taken, and the ship returned to New York to repair her damaged propeller shaft. For her actions on 6 May 1944, the ship's crew were rewarded with a combat star on their European African Theater ribbon, typically only bestowed to ground troops. Buckley would be sold for scrap in 1969. USS Donald D-56 was acting as escort for a convoy which was 450 miles south of Ireland on 3 May 1944 when at 12:00 the ship made sound contact and sighted the periscope of U-473. As the Donald readied for depth charge attack, the Donald was struck by a torpedo that detonated the ship's depth charges and severed off the stern. Donald was dead in the water and had to be towed from the area for repairs. She suffered 29 killed and 25 wounded. Following its successful strike on the Donald, U-473 was subsequently hunted down a few hours later by a responding sub-killer task force and depth charged to Davy Jones' locker. USS Fogg D-57 was escorting a convoy to the East Coast on 20 November 1944 when an LSD in the group was struck by a torpedo from U-870. Fogg began searching for the enemy submarine, but unfortunately the ship was also hit by a torpedo. About 40 feet of the ship's stern was severed by the explosion, killing 14 men and wounding 19 others. The ship struggled for days to stay afloat in heavy seas and evacuated all but a small skeleton crew. Luckily, with the help of a tugboat, the Fogg is able to be towed back to Azores and finally Boston, but not before losing her temporary stern en route across the Atlantic. The ship was scrapped in 1966. USS Bates D-68 was patrolling 2 miles south of Aishima, Okinawa, when on 25 May 1945 at 11:15 Bates was attacked by 3 Japanese D-3A Val dive bombers. The first dropped a bomb, scoring a near miss which ruptured the starboard hull of the ship, then crashed into the starboard side of the fantail. The second aircraft, almost simultaneously, crashed into the portside wheelhouse, knocking out power and spreading gasoline fires. Shortly after, the third enemy plane made a bombing run, scoring a near-miss amidships portside, rupturing the hull and surrounding the ship with burning oil on the sea. At 11:45, the commanding officer ordered Bates abandoned. 21 of her crew were either dead or missing from the attacks, and 35 were wounded. During the afternoon, the tug Cree was able to get a line aboard and towed Bates to Aishima anchorage. At 19:23, the still-burning Bates capsized and sank in 120 ft of water. USS Blessman D-69 was acting as a high-speed transport and returning from delivering underwater demolition teams to the shore of Iwo Jima for beach reconnaissance on 18 February 1945, when at 21:21, the ship was attacked by a low-flying G-4M Betty twin-engine bomber. The enemy plane released a string of bombs, one of which hit the Blessman near the ship's mess hall and number 1 engine room. A large fire erupted in the ship's mess hall and bomb-damaged water lines forced the crew to fight the fire with water buckets handed down the line. Another destroyer came to assist with putting out the fires and evacuating the wounded. With their combined efforts, the fires were brought under control. 40 men were killed and 20 wounded by the attack. The ship would be towed to Sapien and eventually back to the States for permanent repair. She was finished just 2 days after VJ Day. The ship was sold to Taiwan and served in the Republic of China Navy under the name Chung Shan until 1995.